Imagine pulling up to a traffic light in 1963, and beside you appears a massive American coupe, tons of chrome, an elegant appearance, maybe even looking too heavy to actually be fast. And then, it launches like a race car. And honestly, that's exactly what makes 1963 so important. Because many of these cars no longer felt simply fast for their time. They started feeling dangerous, like the muscle car era was about to explode, and maybe it already had. 1963 Pontiac Catalina Super Duty. This car no longer looked like a normal American Grand Tourer. It looked like a machine built to intimidate. And honestly, that's exactly what it was. Because the Catalina represents one of the most extreme moments of America's obsession with horsepower during the 1960s. At this point, we're no longer talking about merely fast cars. We're talking about genuine drag racing monsters legalized for the street. Imagine the context. Pontiac deeply involved in competition, using everything it learned from NASCAR and drag racing to create something absurdly fast. And the result was this. Visually, it still retained part of the typical early 1960s elegance, but it already projected something different. The stance felt more aggressive, lower, more serious, as if the car were ready to launch even while standing still. And under the hood, the story became even wilder. The massive 421 Super Duty V8 officially produced around 405 horsepower. And in 1963, that was already insanity, especially considering the brutal amount of torque this car had, because the Catalina Super Duty wasn't created with luxury or refinement in mind. It was created to win. There's an important detail. Pontiac produced very few true Super Duty cars, and many went directly into drag racing competition. Some examples practically left the factory ready for the track, and that helped build the model's almost legendary reputation. When you look at the numbers from the era, everything becomes even more absurd. Some versions could reach 0 to 60 miles per hour in just over 6 seconds. Incredible figures for such a massive car in 1963. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A Pontiac Catalina Super Duty 421 can easily exceed $200,000, depending on originality and history. 1963 Buick Riviera. This car doesn't look like it was built to be one of the fastest cars of 1963, and that's exactly where the Riviera's magic comes from. Because while many manufacturers were beginning to create cars that looked increasingly aggressive and obviously performance-focused, Buick decided to do something different, to create a car that was elegant, refined, but absurdly fast. Imagine the impact. The Riviera arrived with a body completely different from almost every other American car of the era. Cleaner, lower, more sophisticated, with a design that still feels elegant even today. And honestly, that's one of the reasons it aged so well. The long hood, the low stance, the straight and sharply defined lines. Everything communicates class, while hiding far more power than it appears to have. Under the hood, the massive 425 V8 produced around 340 horsepower, along with an absurd amount of torque, and that transformed the Riviera into something much more serious than most people expected. There's an important detail. The Riviera was created specifically to compete with European Grand Tours, blending American comfort with a much more sophisticated and sporty presence, and that helped turn it into one of the most elegant and important cars of the entire decade. When you look at period performance figures, the Riviera was already capable of extremely high speeds for such a refined and comfortable car, and that surprised a lot of people. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A 1963 Buick Riviera 425 can easily exceed $80,000 depending on condition and originality. 1963 Ford Galaxie. This car no longer looked like a normal street car. It looked like NASCAR legalized for the road. And honestly, that wasn't far from the truth, because by 1963, Ford was already completely obsessed with racing. NASCAR, high-speed competition, increasingly massive engines, everything revolved around performance. And the Galaxie 427 became one of the most brutal responses in that entire war. Imagine the context. a huge American coupe, still elegant, still filled with presence. But now, hiding beneath the hood, one of the most feared engines of the era, the legendary 427 V8. And that's where everything changes, because this car no longer communicates only luxury or comfort. It communicates force. The stance feels more aggressive, the front end heavier, and the entire car seems built around the engine. And honestly, in many ways, it was. The massive 427 officially produced around 425 horsepower. 425 horsepower in 1963. And that immediately placed the Galaxie in a completely different category, especially at high speed, because this car was developed directly with NASCAR in mind, and that was reflected throughout its entire personality. Fast, heavy, brutal. There's an important detail. Many 427-equipped versions were produced in relatively low numbers, and they quickly became legendary among drivers and enthusiasts, precisely because of the engine's brutality. Because this car never tried to hide what it was, it wanted to dominate. When you look at the numbers from the era, everything becomes even more impressive. Some versions could easily exceed 135 miles per hour, something absurd for a massive American car in the early 1960s. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A Ford Galaxie 427 can easily exceed $150,000, depending on configuration and originality. And now, I want to know something. Out of the cars we've seen so far, which one impresses you the most? The brutal Pontiac, the elegant Riviera, or this Galaxie that was practically born from NASCAR? Let me know in the comments. 1963, Dodge 330. This car looks like a completely normal sedan until it accelerates. And that's when it becomes one of the most absurd cars on this entire list. Because this car perfectly represents the American philosophy of the early 1960s. Take an ordinary-looking car and turn it into a drag racing monster. Imagine the scene. A simple sedan, practically no luxury, understated styling, almost no visual indication of performance. Honestly, it looks like a work car. But beneath the hood, the story was completely different. The gigantic 426 Max Wedge 5.8 officially produced around 425 horsepower. And once again, many people believe the real number was even higher, because this car was created almost entirely around pure acceleration, with no concern for refinement, no concern for comfort, only performance. There's an important detail. Many Max Wedge cars receive factory-specific drag racing preparation, including reinforced components and extremely aggressive setups for the time. And that made these cars feared on American drag strips, especially because visually, they still looked like simple sedans. And that's where one of the most perfect sleepers of 1963 was born, because almost nobody expected something this discreet to accelerate that hard. When you look at the performance numbers from the era, everything becomes even wilder. Some versions could complete the quarter mile in shockingly quick times for a street car in the early 1960s. And honestly, at this point, it no longer feels like the muscle car era was arriving. It feels like it had already begun. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A Dodge 330. Max Wedge can easily exceed $120,000, depending on originality and history. It isn't the most elegant car here, but it may be one of the most brutally honest cars on this entire list. 1963, Chrysler 300J. This car never needed to look aggressive because its presence already demanded respect. And that's exactly what makes the 300J so special. Because while other manufacturers were beginning to create cars that felt increasingly radical and competition-focused, Chrysler continued betting on something different: luxury, elegance, and an absurd amount of power hidden beneath all of it. Imagine the context. The legendary letter cars series already had a serious reputation in America. Massive and refined automobiles capable of matching the speed of far more overtly sporty machines. And the 300J pushed that idea even further. Visually, the car still communicates sophistication. The clean lines, the imposing size, the elegant Chrysler styling, everything feels designed around comfort and presence. But beneath the hood, there was a monster. The gigantic 413 V8 produced around 390 horsepower, and that transformed the 300J into one of the fastest luxury cars in all of America in 1963. Because this car didn't accelerate in a nervous or chaotic way, it accelerated with authority, as if speed were simply natural to it, and that completely changed the experience. There is an important detail. Unlike many of the more extreme cars of the era, the 300J wasn't built specifically for drag racing or NASCAR. It was created to prove that a massive, refined luxury coupe could also be absurdly fast. And, honestly, very few cars did that better. When you look at the numbers from the era, everything becomes even more impressive. It could easily exceed 135 miles per hour. Astonishing figures for such a large and heavy luxury coupe. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A Chrysler 300J can easily exceed $80,000 depending on condition and originality. 1963, Studebaker Avanti R2. This car didn't feel American, and honestly, that was part of its charm, because the Avanti R2 was completely different from almost everything else in the United States in 1963. While many manufacturers were still building huge chrome-covered cars, Studebaker decided to create something futuristic, something strange, something that looked like it came from somewhere else entirely. And the result was this: a low GT car, visually incredibly clean, with no traditional front grille, and a body shape that seemed years ahead of its time. And honestly, even today it still feels different. There's something almost European about the Avanti, especially in the way the lines flow across the body. But the most interesting part is that it wasn't only beautiful or futuristic, it was fast, very fast. Under the hood, the Avanti R2's supercharged V8 produced around 289 horsepower, and maybe that doesn't sound outrageous compared to some of the monsters on this list. But here the secret was the complete package, because the Avanti was lighter, more aerodynamic, and visually far more modern than many American rivals of the time. And that made an enormous difference at high speed. There's an important detail. The Avanti R2 quickly gained fame for breaking speed records at Bonneville, helping turn the car into one of the boldest creations in Studebaker history. And that completely changed its reputation. It could exceed 170 miles per hour depending on the setup. Something completely unbelievable for 1963. And honestly, that helps explain why so many people consider this car one of the most underrated American cars of the entire decade. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A Studebaker Avanti R2 can easily exceed $100,000 depending on condition and originality. And now, I want to know something. Which of these cars feels the most unusual to you so far? Let me know in the comments. 1963 Chevrolet Corvette. Stingray. This car no longer looked like a traditional American sports car. It looked like the future, and honestly, when it appeared, it completely changed the image of the Corvette, because the 1963 Stingray was far more than just a new generation. It was a visual revolution. Imagine the impact. America fully entering the space age, designs becoming more aggressive, more aerodynamic, more futuristic. And Chevrolet responds with this. A car impossibly low, muscular, radically different from every Corvette that came before it. Everything felt far more modern. The famous split window helped turn this car into one of the most iconic automotive shapes of the entire decade, especially because that divided rear glass made the car look almost like a production concept car, and that made its visual presence even stronger. Under the hood, the 327 V8 could produce up to 360 horsepower, depending on the version. And that transformed the Stingray into something extremely serious for 1963, especially considering the car was much smaller and sportier than many of the enormous American coupes of the era. And that's the important detail. The Stingray wasn't only fast in a straight line, it was beginning to deliver an experience much closer to European sports cars, more precision, more control, more balance. And that completely changed the Corvette's reputation. When you look at the numbers from the era, everything becomes even more impressive. Some versions could easily exceed 150 miles per hour. Something incredible for an American sports car in the early 1960s. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A 1963 Corvette Stingray split window can easily exceed $200,000 depending on configuration and originality. 1963 Plymouth Sport Fury. This car looked enormous, but it accelerated as if it wanted to destroy everything beside it. And honestly, that was exactly the intention. It represents one of the wildest moments of the entire American horsepower war. Here, subtlety no longer existed, balance no longer mattered, and there was certainly no concern for fuel economy or refinement. Everything revolved around one thing only: brutal acceleration. Imagine the context. Chrysler completely obsessed with drag racing, Dodge and Plymouth battling each other while also fighting GM and Ford, and increasingly outrageous engines appearing beneath gigantic American cars. And the result was this monster. Visually, the Sport Fury still carried the elegance typical of the early 1960s. Massive proportions, huge presence, long refined lines. But beneath the hood, there was something completely different. The gigantic 426 Max Wedge 5.8 officially produced around 425 horsepower. The torque was brutal, the acceleration violent, and the sound of the engine already felt like the announcement of the muscle car era. And there's an important detail. Many Max Wedge cars were used directly in drag racing, and they quickly became famous for humiliating rivals that looked much lighter and more purpose-built. Because this car didn't look like a race car, but it behaved like one. And that's exactly what makes it so impressive. When you look at the numbers from the era, everything feels ahead of its time for 1963. Some versions could complete the quarter mile in absurdly fast times for such a massive American street coupe. And honestly, at this point, it becomes difficult to say the muscle car era hadn't already begun. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A Plymouth Sport Fury Max Wedge can easily exceed $150,000 depending on originality and history. 1963 Oldsmobile Starfire. This car didn't look like a speed monster, it looked like pure luxury, and that's exactly why it surprised so many people. Imagine the context. Early 1960s, manufacturers fighting for horsepower, engines growing larger every year, but Oldsmobile following a slightly different path, less visually aggressive, more sophisticated. And the result was this: a massive coupe, elegant, covered in chrome details, with a very refined presence for the era. Honestly, at first glance, it looks more like an executive luxury car than one of the fastest cars of 1963. But beneath the hood, the story changed completely. The gigantic Rocket 394 V8 produced around 345 horsepower, and that transformed the Starfire into something far more serious than it appeared to be. There's an important detail. The Starfire was one of Oldsmobile's most luxurious and exclusive models, featuring extremely refined interiors, a full center console, and a level of equipment that was incredibly advanced for its time. And that made its performance even more surprising, because nobody expected something so comfortable to be that fast. When you look at the numbers from the era, it becomes even more impressive. The Starfire could easily exceed 130 miles per hour, something extremely serious for a massive American luxury coupe in 1963. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A 1963 Oldsmobile Starfire can easily exceed $70,000 depending on condition and originality. And when you look at all these cars together, you begin to realize something very clearly. 1963 no longer felt like a simple evolution. It felt like the beginning of a completely new era. And now I want to know something. Out of every car in this video, which one feels the most impressive to you? The most brutal? The most elegant? Or simply the most out of control? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see how all this madness first started growing, you need to watch this video about the fastest American cars of 1962, because back then there was still a little more elegance. But you could already feel that something gigantic was about to happen. See you in the next video.